we're going to continue on with the shading and shadowing. So so that I don't smear things going this way, I am going to start in the back, and I'm going to stay with my no, I'm not. I'm going to go to an HB. So it's a little bit darker. Not going to get the absolute blacks in just yet, but I want you to remember that there is a little bit of light reflecting in these areas. It's still black, but as you see these little gray parts and stuff like that, we want to put, you know, not a lot of emphasis, but we just want those to be a little bit lighter. Probably should have stayed with that H for this part. And so I'm going to just put a light gray around those. Now I'm going to go back to my HB, and it looks like I'm following, I don't know if you can see this line, so I'm going to darken it a little bit. I'm following this section and coming right up to this light, and I am making it much darker. Now remember, when we blend with our tortillon, things get darker, so doesn't have to be absolute black in order to get black whenever you're blending. So if you cover over any little section or something, remember, we can always do lift offs as long as we don't go to our like 4B pencil or excuse me, something like that. I could have just left that the white of the page, and and when we blend this, just, you know, softly touch it. That's another way to do it. A little bit of gray right in there. Now this is our highlight. We want to leave that as, you know, white as absolutely possible. And there is another little white one right here, so I'm just going to draw it in as I'm going. Kind of shade around it so I don't accidentally color it in. If you use the side of your pencil, you'll get it shaded in pretty quickly. If the wood is standing out, you're going to get these little scratches, so don't press really hard, and you know that won't happen. And my wood is sticking out. Turn my hand just so we end up with this nice shine on him. And we're going to blend this so you don't have to worry about lines being bumpy and stuff. So that is definitely a dark abdomen, and I don't want my brush to smear into this, so try not to brush through this. If you have any eraser dust or something, then you can just, you know, kind of blow it lightly. So I'm going to change to my other let's see, that's a 2B, not an HB. You should have 2 HBs in your set. Is that it? Oh, sure is. Okay. I'll get rid of the 2B. Both of these really need to be sharpened, so I'm going to pause right here. Y'all catch up, and I'll be right back. So now we're going to shade our body like it would be a cylinder. There's a little bit of shading across the top. Just a little. This is on top of, it's like a plate that's on top of. So we're going to use the side of our pencil, and I'm going to go back to the H, the 2H, because I don't want it to be black. Well, that's pretty black. But it's, hopefully that'll blend out to be a little bit lighter. So that's on top, and it indents a little bit, and this is coming down into a shadow area. I am back to my HB. And I don't want his body to be too dark because his legs are black. And so I don't want to, you know, I want there to be a definite difference in the colors that I use. And then I'm going to turn this way and put a internal shadow on each of these sections. Now I'm going to stop here at this leg, even though if I went through it, it'd be no big deal. I just want to make sure I see where the leg goes, because the legs are so much darker. And then the back side of his head over here is darker. Around this side of his eye is a dark, but not as dark as back here. There is kind of a little V shape that is coming out of his nose area. And then a light shadowy part coming from behind his eye. It's an internal shadow. Now this little light right here is just like when we did our sphere. This is reflected light. So it's actually going to be a little bit lighter right there. It's a little bit darker behind this eye. These are tiny little things. Now we're going to go ahead and color in the eye, and the eye on this side does not have a catch light, so he is just black, and you need a nice sharp point to get that. Now on this eye we're going to go around this highlight, but if you'll notice the highlight is two different colors: absolute bright white, a medium gray, and then the black of the eyeball itself is right in here. And then this has just a touch of gray to it. We'll do that really pretty much with a dirty Tertullian. Now on anytime you're shading a cylinder or something, you always want the point to follow the line that you're trying to establish as the shadow side. So you can see that I've done that here, and we're going to do it on the other side as well. And that is the antenna, and the antenna and the body, the antenna, the head, and the body part in the center are all the same color, and the legs and the abdomen back here, the legs are almost black. Right here, as they start to touch the body, they're a little bit lighter, so we'll just lift those off whenever we get to drawing and shading those. Okay, so you need to take one of the Tertullians that you have in your set, and if you have one of the blending stump, so whatever you're using, you just want to make sure it has a good point. This is way too big to be blending this guy, so stick with one of your smaller Tertullians, okay? So we're going to start back here in the back, and it's going to get really blackened, this Tertullian, because we're going in the darkest part. And notice my hand is sitting way over here. So remember, if you need to, use a piece of the glassine that you have to put your hand on, so that when you're blending, you're not sitting there smearing up your ant, right? Because your hand is moving back and forth. And I pivot from right here, or you know, from my arm, so that my whole hand can move. So most all of my hand is off of the paper. Just that tiny little part of my wrist is even touching. Just going around those little highlights a little more carefully. Now I am using my Tertullian a little bit on the point, but I'm not pressing it very hard at all, guys. You do not have to press hard in order to get your pigment to blend on the surface of the paper. Now I'm going just a little bit past that really light line that we drew for the shadow, just to soften the edge, and the outline line of the very back needs to be blended into that shadow. So I'm going all around it, and then I'm going to use the side of my Tertullian. And remember, if you go outside the lines, no big deal. We just erase it. Nobody's perfect. My pencils are rolling. Okay. I don't know if y'all can hear a little bit better for this half since I sharpened the pencils, but I forgot I had an air conditioner on back there, and it was definitely making some noise. So this is not white, it is gray, but it's lighter than the shadow, definitely lighter than the back. So to me, this shade and this shadow are the same color. So what I need to do is just take my pencil, and we're going to make it a little bit darker, especially right next to him. You don't have to go all the way to this outer edge because we want that to be softer anyway. But I want to kind of create this bump effect that he has on his body. And then we're going to shade that again. Where that comes in, yeah, it does. This kind of has a full line right there. Oval, oval, oval. These Tertullians are very soft. I don't know what kind of paper they use for them. I'm kind of used to a little bit harder paper, so we may have to replace them a couple of times throughout the year, depending on how much we end up using these smaller ones. I think the stumps for large areas, and I like the Tertullians for the smaller parts. Okay, so now we're going to jump into, we're not going to worry about these highlights and stuff. We are going to soften next to them and all, but we're going to go ahead and finish shading his body. Sorry about that. Go up and around those legs. Definitely darker down here where it attaches to the head. And there's a shadow on the head over here. Softer on this side. And then right here in the center is this N shape, and I think it may be one that's going to be hard to lift off. I'll tell you what, we are going to lift it off. Just right here in the middle of the head, just remember to barely touch your Tertullian with any, hardly touching it at all. I'll touch it out here, go around that eye. There's actually a tiny little highlight on the skin around the eye there. We'll do that with a lift off. This little V shape kind of blends in to the rest, going around that eye, underneath those antennae. And then we're just going to go ahead and shade this lightly with our tortillon because we're going to lift off tiny little dots. Look very closely to your reference photo, and you'll see that it's made of these little dots. And so each one of them is has a shadow and has a highlight. So we're just going to kind of create those little dot effects on it, and then we'll go back and add the highlights. They're tiny little sections actually. So we're just going to kind of put the little dots using the dirty side of my tortillon. If it goes outside the line, that's okay, because they're not circles inside of two lines. They're actual sections, you know, kind of like the sections of our finger. They're just tons of these little sections that he has. It's not very dark, but I can always go back and make that darker. All right. So this is the lightest part of the body. So I'm just using my tortillon to softly make those little highlights. I'm trying to leave a little bit of white because that's where the shine is on him. Look at your reference photo, which I'm trying to leave these little shines on him. This one right here, I completely went over. Okay, so let's go back in with our pencil, and you can use your HB for this part too. And we're going to softly shade his legs, and then they're going to get pretty black. So remember up here where they connect together, you can just go ahead and draw a little circle. That's going to be a highlight. We'll soften it out, but it's darker farther away and lighter close to the body, okay? And this little section curves. This one's straighter. Definitely darker on the bottom. And then there's that little section. And then the little feet part are kind of little sections as well. So if you want to, you can just draw little circles like that, and we'll go back in and erase away the outer lines. Yeah, it depends on what we end up doing for the background. Soft, dark, as it goes away. And you need to make sure that the lines are very crisp, right? There is a highlight right there. So I'm gonna go around it. You want those lines not to be fuzzy. Now the shadow parts are going to be fuzzy because, you know, they're shadows. You can get a pretty crisp line depending on how close to something you are, but most shadows have a softer edge. Kind of makes them look, you know, like they're farther away and not the object of interest, I guess. This side is a little lighter. The top is darker. Just continue on with your marking out where your highlights go, putting in these legs. This should actually come out and then come in. Might be a little thick, but it works. He's a big guy. I get a lot of these photos off of either Pixabay, so they have free photography for artists on, it's called free reference photos for artists, I guess, .com. And I get a lot of our pictures from those places in order to work from. But you can always go out and, you know, take pictures yourself, and we can do art from those. Just send them to me. Make sure you've got a good, strong highlight. Make sure you've got it in the morning or late kind of evening light, so that there's a directional light. and make sure that you know, that it's not just all the same color. I mean, look at the contrast between this orange and this green, this dark, dark, dark brownish black, you know, against this gold color that's in his, you know, there's just something very interesting about having that, having all that contrast. It just is lovely. In this square, there's highlight on both sides. I'm going to put the square back in so you can see it. There's highlight on both sides and a little bit right there in the front. And then it's soft and then dark and then soft again. It just means it's not as dark. It's still dark, but follow your reference photo so that you can see where all these absolute darks. And make sure you're following the leg and not the shadow. I could see that could happen pretty easily. Make this look like the leg instead of the shadow. And then down here, this little part is dark at the front and then lighter at the back. And then it doesn't really show as much, but you know it's got those little sections, so I'm just gonna add the dots. This leg is absolute black coming out of the body. Coming up. And then there's a highlight on the top where it's bent. And there's a highlight along this side over here. So I'm going to go around it. I really want you to look at your reference photos, guys. Don't draw what you think. Draw what you see. And there are some bumps in this, just like the feet and the antenna in that section. And there's this long skinny part, pretty dark. And the circles are very light and then get darker. I guess it's because it's kind of turned up. You know, these parts are in the light and then these darks because it's not setting on the ground. This part here comes in thin and then gets thicker, and that goes straighter. Make any adjustments you feel you need to before you know, committed. So there's a highlight right there to you know, putting these darks in. We're pretty committed at that point. It's hard to get them back to light. You can usually get back to gray, but you can't get back to the white of the paper. Now this is very black as it's in shadow. And then there's that foot, which has a little triangular part there, and then the little dots. So we'll do that. And I never did put in this shadow all the way. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our Tertullian, and we're going to softly blend out those dots in the feet, especially, so that you can tell that they're the feet. You want each of these sections, so it's softer here and then gets darker here. My Tertullian might have been a little too dirty for that, but we're gonna just keep putting in our little sections of highlight. If you go outside the lines, it's no big deal. You just take your eraser and just stay up on edge, and you can get it back to the part that you want. Get it back to keep the dark in the lines. Not all of those are going to need to be done. Okay, now the cast shadow is much darker than the body. And we know where that cast shadow is because we've drawn it in, right? I'm going to use my pencil from the side to cast that shadow. There is one right there. That is a shadow. Right there. And we're going to come around that head all the way to the body. And the leg is darker, so I'm not going to put as much right past the leg. It's definitely going to be darker up underneath the head, and then gets softer out here as we go out away from it. There are those scratches in the paper from earlier. I'm going to fill those in just a little bit. And then this is the body here, shadow, and then this is the leg shadow. It starts darker and gets lighter as it goes out. That's the body shadow, and this is pretty dark as it goes out. I'm not going to want that hard edge on there, so you can soften that now as you are doing these shadows, or you can just do it with your Tertullian. I didn't want it as black, so that's why I went ahead and just took it off. We're going to go to our Tertullian. We're going to blend out down the center of these, and then I like to go in the direction, so I'm going to go up this way. So if I went sideways, it's going to make a thick line, right? So I want it to make a thin line, so I'm kind of coming up the shadowy part, and it's going to soften the shadows on both sides there. So this was, as long as you don't push really hard, you're going to be able to get rid of all of the dark marks. Sorry about that. My table is shaking, so I'll just fix it later. So this shadow has got to be a lot darker than the antenna for sure. This shadow of the head helps create that highlight effect to the back. Shadow, shadow. Soften along that body shadow. And there's no shadow of the body here. There's a little bit of a shadow right there, which I need to go back and make darker because it is on that black part. It really needs to be darker. As I want it to look more like a shadow than part of the animal or insect. Okay, so now is the time that I am just following the lines. So you have to keep turning your book and don't set your hand in it, right? So let that, you can go up and down in order to get that look. Get those shadows in. There's a little shadow of the body right back there. Right through here. Right through there. Whoops, I filled that whole thing in. No big deal. We have our little erasers, and if you don't have one of these mono zero erasers, just, order them off of Amazon or whatever. then you could just use the edge of an eraser. I like to use the edge of the one on my mechanical pencil. So keep turning the paper. I want to go this way. And that softens those edges. Keeps them very soft, not crisp. And my Tritillion's pretty dirty, but if it's not dirty enough that it's go into one of the dark areas and pick up some of that pigment, and then it should get darker in the middle for you and softer on the edges. All right, look at our guy. Isn't he cool? Around this foot, there is a little bit of shadow around this part of the leg. It's on both sides, so I'm just going to kind of smudge it. It's like the shadow is seen a little bit on both sides of it, and his foot's not that long. There we go. Okay, so now we have drawn it out. We have casted our shadows. We have done the contrast in the legs and left some of the highlights. So we're going to go back in and actually add the highlights, and we're going to blacken, really blacken this area. So we're going to jump over to our 4B pencil. And since we already know where these sections are, we're not going to be erasing anything or anything like that. This is the time that you can go super dark with your blacks. Don't set your hand down on the page so that you can not smear any of the work we've already done. Or use your, your tracing paper. If you don't have that tracing paper for some reason, or it got dirty or something, you can always erase the tracing paper too. It's if something did get on it, then you can just tear a page out of the back of the book and use paper. Oh, at home, a lot of times, I will be using paper from my printer. Just grab a cheap piece of copy paper. So the back half of the ant needs to be the darkest, not the shadow. So it needs to be darker than the shadow. So let's give that a good coat. Oval, oval, oval helps blend away every bit of the white of the paper. And keep turning your pencil as you go so that you don't create a hard line with a wedge type shape. Some people like to use those wedge shapes, but this should go this way. And then right here, as it connects to this part, there is definitely a hard line. So we're going to put that in. Okay, probably shouldn't have done that with the 4B, but that's okay. It's just a small, small, small thing. So, all right, always keep your erasers clean. I always tell everybody to look at your eraser and clean it before we ever start the drawing process. So each week, make sure you've got your supplies, you've cleaned your eraser before we start putting in all of our, oh, not a 4B. Let's go back to HB. You can't really tell where these little antenna holes are. So I'm going to draw around them again, adding that dark kind of V shape that's on his head. And add that in. And then up underneath, there is a little bit of dark in there as well. Going into the face and the shadow kind of become one up underneath his body. Oh, that's a brand new one. I wasn't using that one. There we go. Any of these that have not been blended, you're still going to see the parts of the paper. So really look and make sure you've gotten those legs blended well.